Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye has friends. No, really, Jeff has friends. Jeff's friends are on this podcast. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship. Jeff Dye's friendship.
Friendship.
All right, what's up, you guys? I promised you this week you would have two episodes. Two episodes this week. They're late, but you get two. I'm super excited for the next guest. He's a super cool dude. He's a new friend of mine. We kind of discuss how I became friends with this guy. He's a new friend. You know, even in quarantine, I make it an effort to become friends with someone. And this week is I'm excited to introduce to you Kevin CARIGNAN. I think I'm saying it right. Kevin CARIGNAN. I just call him Kev or Kev Dog. That's what's going to be our nicknames. You know, we keep it cash. He calls me J Dog. I call him Kev Dog. I don't know how that probably won't last. That probably won't stick. But anyways, Kevin CARIGNAN is he is the author and creator of Outright Geeky or Outright Geekery. There's a bunch of things that this guy does, and it's all in the stuff I like. Video games, fighting games, wrestling, home gaming, all these great things. He doesn't play a lot of sports stuff. We have some differences, but for the most part, it's all things that I really, really enjoy, and he's my go-to guy for all my Mortal Kombat questions from here on out. Anyways, I'm not gonna even, this is such a fun episode, and we click and talk and have a good time so much that I'm just gonna let you get right into it. You're gonna love this guy. Check in the bio of this episode, if you're a Patreon subscriber, for all the places you can find him and all of his social medias. Give him a follow. He's an awesome guy. He's from Florida. Don't hold it against him. Just kidding. We love Florida. And also, read some of his stuff, man. He knows what he's talking about, and he's just the perfect amount of funny, just the perfect amount of nerd. He's the perfect amount of all these things. I'm happy to be his new friend, and I'm happy to introduce you to my new friend, Kevin CARIGNAN. But without further ado, enjoy. Welcome to Jeff Dye's Friendship Podcast, Kevin. I'm super excited to have you, man.
Hey, man, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Where exactly are you? I know you're in Florida, but that's so vague, man. Be more specific.
I am in South Florida, specifically Davie, about an hour north of Miami.
Okay. Yeah, I know Miami. I've heard of that.
Yeah. Well, most people, Florida is just Miami, Disney World, and swamp. That's it.
Yeah, that's all. And, like, it's funny because Florida gets a bad rap. I talk about this on stage a lot. It's like 7 different states.
Yeah.
It's unfair to lump everyone into Florida. There is that part of Florida where you're like, ugh, there's some methy idiots, you know?
Every section of Florida has its different kinds of ugh.
Right. Well, no, like you'll go up one area, you're like, oh, here's all the old people they talk about in Florida.
Yeah.
And then you go to another one, you're like, oh, here's all the drugs. Like, it's kind of like in these regions, so it's unfair to put that on everyone.
Yeah, but like Floridians will be the first to tell you, like, whenever you hear those Florida man jokes, it's like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you just agree. Yeah, it's right. At least we're known for something. Well, I do comedy shows in Miami sometimes, and I can't tell you how it's such a party. Nobody's working.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like, it's only an hour and away, but it might as well be a completely different planet. In fact, people from Miami often like to say, I'm not from Florida, I'm from Miami.
Which is, yeah, I think that's a good separation. Because, like, even the people working aren't working. Like, we went to a bar, and the bartender, she's just sitting over there, like, talking to some guy, and she's, like, cutting limes. But, like, we sat there for, like, 25 minutes. She wasn't busy. She was just, like, doing her, I have 100,000 followers on Instagram. I don't need to serve you. You're like, you're our bartender.
Yeah, do your job.
Yeah, she's just so beautiful and had like a great butt that like that's her life's currency. She's like a celebrity in Miami.
Yeah. And the further south that goes, the further south the followers will go.
Yeah, exactly. It's awful. Well, I'm excited to have you on here. I originally, during quarantine, actually, I've been
watching and playing a lot of, like, I've been playing a lot of Mortal Kombat. Like, I'm getting reacclimated with, like, my favorite game as a kid. But while doing that, I just, like, I kind of obsess about things. And so when I started obsessing about MK11 and playing all the new stuff, I started, like, downloading the Mortal Kombat Legacy on YouTube and watching season 1 and 2 of that. I bought this book online that actually turned out to be crap when I got here, but it was like a Mortal Kombat encyclopedia. And then I've been going to MK Wikipedia. And I stumbled upon on Amazon Prime The History of Mortal Kombat Part 1 and Part 2 as hosted by your boy, Kevin.
Yep. That was back when I worked at a company called the Esports Channel, which is unfortunately no longer of this earth. But we were able to get the first 2 parts, and I had the scripts written for part 3 and 4, which would have gone all the way up until 11. But sadly, it wasn't to be. But yeah, and then I randomly got this message on Instagram from somebody. I'm like, who the hell is this? Because the only people that message me on Instagram are like my girlfriend, a couple of friends, and bots. That's it.
I watched you on there, which, by the way, if you have the scripts for 3 and 4, we should shoot it. We should make it. I didn't know you wrote them.
Oh, yeah, dude. I even had a script for the history of Street Fighter.
Really? Because it's so well written. And I also thought that I don't like when people are negative. That's a very big – I don't enjoy that. I'm like, I love life and I love everything. And so, like, that's kind of part of my popularity is that people go, oh, good, he doesn't bum us out. A lot of comedians can be funny, but they're kind of a bummer. Whereas, like, my whole thing is, like, but there is a place for sarcasm and snark and things like that. Whereas yours was the perfect amount of making fun of something or saying your opinion, but also you do love Mortal Kombat, and you could tell that, and you knew it. And so it was the perfect tone on that.
Yeah, especially for something as goofy as Mortal Kombat is, you have to have a kind of sense of humor about it. Like, there's guys made of meat and wearing motion capture suits and dudes barfing on the floor. It's like, you can't take that stuff too seriously. In fact, I think when some of the games did take itself too seriously is when they kind of declined a little bit, you know?
Sure. Well, and that's the thing. Like, you played this exact same tone that Tobias and Ed Boon and John Tobias play of, like, their game is great, but also does play with the silly and the whatever. So I liked that a lot. But when I was watching it was so funny. I just go, I feel like I'd be friends with this dude. You remind me of, like, a lot of my friends that I have in my regular life. And all my guy friends are obsessed with, like, gaming or action figures or anything that's, like, kind of in this Comic-Con kind of, like, gaming universe. And so I was like, I'm just going to message this dude. One, I want to know where the other 2 parts of this thing are, or if there was just a third part, like, at the time I didn't know. And then I was also like, plus, he probably knows all the questions I have about Mortal Kombat in the first place. So it was like 2 birds, you know, I get to be friends with this dude, and also I can ask him my questions about Mortal Kombat. So it's perfect. So that's how I got to know you, which made me very excited. And I found out that by looking at your Instagram and then also just talking with you back and forth, you're a big just fighting game guy in general.
Yeah, like, obviously video games are my forte. Those are like, because like you said, I'm into all that kind of stuff, movies, TV, anime, comic books, all that stuff. But definitely video games and specifically fighting games are like my area of expertise.
Yeah, I mean, you knew, like, I'm actually really impressed that you wrote those. I didn't know that. I thought maybe they were just like, oh, he knows a bunch about this. We'll give him these things. Yeah, it sounds like it would be like a team of work.
Yeah, well, originally I was just a writer when I was first brought on board, and there was another guy who was the on-camera host, and that he left for a different job. So this was like not even like a month into working, I got promoted to producer, you know?
Nice. Yeah.
So I ended up writing the scripts and being on camera, and then we had an editor in the office who did all the video stuff. Like,
yeah, the video stuff's really well done as well, too.
Thank you. Actually, when you first messaged me, I messaged her because we're still in touch, and I said, "Oh, someone found our videos and liked it," and she really appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you still have contact with her, like I said, we should. I wonder if you're able to, like, redo the first one and second one, or use it anywhere if they own it, or like how that works. But, like, you should put all the 4 up.
They do own it, but we could definitely, like, do a remix version. That actually sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then just put it online. Me and Freddie and all of our other nerd friends would, like, just blast the shit out of it and get some funding. But anyways, we'll talk about that when we're not on. So I was excited to meet you. But Mortal Kombat is my favorite fighting game. But what is your favorite fighting game?
Well, it's funny, like ever since the early 90s, there was always that thing of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. They were like the Crips and the Bloods of the arcades, you know.
Yeah.
You were either into one or the other. You can't cross the streams. But now I think it's a lot more lenient. I pretty much like every one of the big fighting game franchises, Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, yada yada. But my personal favorite is the Marvel vs. Capcom series, because that was
Okay.
actually the first fighting game I ever played when I was 8 years old. I went to an arcade. Kids ask your parents what an arcade is, they'll tell you. And I saw a cabinet for Marvel vs. Capcom 1. And back then, I only knew like the Marvel characters. Like I was a big Spider-Man kid and all that.
Right.
So I had no idea who this like Karate Man and all these other people were. But that kind of got me into that world. And I started playing a lot of these games casually, of course, just because I was young and everything. And then in 2009, when Street Fighter 4 came out, because fighting games were dead for like a decade before that, there was nothing going on. And so that kind of revitalized the scene. And Street Fighter 4 is the reason we have all these other games now. And that's how I got into the competitive scene. So I actually started playing to enter tournaments and stuff. And then that led me
Nice.
to, thank you. I didn't say I was that good, but I did start, you know.
Well, what a fun thing to get to go to and to be
Mhm.
like to even be aware of. Like sometimes people don't get into a thing until like, oh, that's been around for 30 years. You didn't know about that? Like whereas like you were, you know, kind of on the forefront of that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like when I discovered like with Street Fighter 4, like I just played with my friends like casually back and forth, and I had no idea there was this huge competitive scene with people who had been playing for decades, that there was all these strategies and lingo and all this stuff, and I was
Yeah.
like, well, I just pressed buttons and sometimes I won, you know?
Yeah.
But that was an amazing thing, and then I discovered the community, and then I got in touch with my local community, the South Florida fighting game community. And a couple years ago in 2017, I actually got to go to Evo in Las Vegas, which was my first time
Nice.
in Vegas. And I've been wanting to go to Evo ever since I found out what it was in 2009. And that was an amazing experience. So, yeah.
Walk me through a young Kevin, like when you first
I
played an
thought-
arcade machine and stuff like that. Like who was giving you quarters? Where was the arcade? Like where like was it an actual proper arcade or just like a pizza place that had one, you know, one thing?
Well, funny enough, it was this place called Discovery Zone. I don't know if they had those over there or like how regional they were, but it was like a Chuck E. Cheese kind of thing. But it was a lot bigger and a lot better. They had like these like physical activity things you could do, swinging on bars, ball pits, all that kind of stuff. And then they had an arcade. And being the dork that I was, I never went in any of that. I stayed solely in the arcade.
Right. That's your
So
area.
exactly. So that's when I first saw this machine. And I'm like, oh my God, Spider-Man, this is so cool. So of course my mom and dad were the ones who gave me the quarters and everything. And then my first ever gaming console was an N64.
Oh, that's a great console. I still have that in my main family room. Like that is still always plugged into my
Oh,
television.
nice.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing about the N64 is that it's notorious for having no fighting games, like one or two, and they all sucked. So
Yeah, the Mortal Kombat for that was dog shit.
it was terrible, dude. Like every game that got ported to the N64 was the worst version of that game.
Yeah.
So the next console I got was a PS2, which could play PS1 games. So that's how I ended up playing a lot of those earlier games, like after the fact. And I remember one day, specifically, it was in a Sears. I know I'm old.
No, I mean that's great.
Well, my parents and I were going up to the second floor, and they had all the electronic stuff there. And I saw Marvel versus Capcom 2, and I went, what? There's a second one? And I bugged the absolute shit out of my parents until they bought me it. And actually, hang on. Yeah. I still have that to this day.
Oh, nice.
This is
Yeah, that was
same
life-changing
copy.
for you right there.
Yeah, and this Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is my favorite game of all time, without a question. Like I have made friendships over this game, and it's like it's a lifestyle experience, man. And like yes, and so now that I had access to a system that could play all those kinds of games, that's how I got all the, you know, real fighting games. Started playing Tekken and Soul Calibur, and then eventually I got a Dreamcast, which for those who don't know, that is the ultimate fighting game console.
Yeah, it's like I think the opening game was Ready to Rumble, right? Like that was like the first game you could get with it, which was a boxing fight game.
and the original Soul Calibur. And what made the Dreamcast so perfect for it was the parts inside of it were the exact same parts that were used in the arcade machines in Japan.
wow.
So whenever a fighting game came on the Dreamcast, it was arcade perfect. And that was the first time a game could be arcade perfect.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I remember like home consoles changed the game for me as far as like I would like dream about getting to the Ninja Turtles arcade at the grocery store.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
to
yeah.
get to, wait, what's it called when it's just cabinet? That's what it would be called.
Mhm.
There was a cabinet, like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cabinet at Fred Meyer, and I was like, oh, tomorrow I'm gonna spend all my quarters playing that game. And then like
Yep.
Mortal Kombat was at the Godfather's Pizza in my hometown, and I was like, oh, I gotta
Mhm.
play that. And then that was right next to NBA Jam, which is how I fell in love with NBA Jam. And then when I learned you could just play this at your house, I was
Mhm.
like, what? All of my favorite games will just be at my house? I
Yeah.
never have to leave my house. This is insane. Like I couldn't get my mind around the fact, and you could just stay up all night playing.
Mhm.
I still think that's like such a fun memory of that time.
Yeah, and the sad thing is the other side of that coin is because you could play all these games at home, that's one of the big reasons arcades kind of died in America.
Absolutely. But the good thing is, in my opinion, I just want to get so rich and have so much money that I'll just build an arcade in my house. So like when I want to
Oh,
play those
yeah.
cabinets,
That's every dork's dream, man. Like, actually, have you ever heard of this company called Arcade One Up?
no.
They sell them in Walmart and a couple other places. It's this company that makes like small standalone arcade cabinets for different games, and they usually come with like 4 or 5 or more games in one of them.
Nice.
And they cost about $200 to $300, but it's an actual arcade cabinet, and they're small enough that you could reasonably put them in like a room or something. And they have a Mortal Kombat one that has.
I have an arcade, and you'll see it in the. Actually, you won't see it in the background of this because we're here. But in my actual podcast studio upstairs, I have an arcade cabinet. But the problem is, it has like 250 games, which is awesome. But the problem is because the cabinet isn't modified for a specific game, they had to make the controls kind of generic. So your hands are kind of in a weird spot. Whereas like, on the old games, that cabinet was made for that game. And so that makes it a little clunky to play. That's why it'd be great to just have each cabinet be the original game, like in a place would be awesome.
Yeah, and I have a friend of mine who lives in Chicago. So in his basement, he actually bought like 3 or 4 of those and has like started to develop his own little like arcade/man cave down there.
That's
using
awesome.
those things. And they actually just came out with one that's the first 4-player one they did, and it's the Ninja Turtles beat 'em up.
Oh, that's great.
So you can actually have 4 people all controlling each one and play the game.
Which is a great game. They went with kind of a Nickelodeon animation on that game, but it's still cool.
Oh, the newer one you mean? No, I mean the original one.
I didn't know there was an original one.
Oh, yeah, like the original one from like the early 90s, where it was like pixelated and it looked more like the 90s cartoon. I know the one you're talking about. That one is good too.
Yeah, but because I thought that was the only like Ninja Turtle fight game was like that new one. I didn't know there was like an old one.
Oh, yeah. There's the side-scrolling beat 'em up one, and then there's the actual fighting game, which is TMNT Tournament Fighter, which is a really obscure I think it's Super Nintendo game that people do still actually have tournaments for. That's another
pretty cool.
That's another great thing about fighting games is whenever you go to these big events, chances are whatever obscure game that you think nobody knows about, let alone plays, there's a side tournament for it. I
love
remember when I went to CEO last year in Daytona, which is one of the biggest fighting game tournaments in the country, there was a tournament for the super shitty Jackie Chan fighting game that came out on Super Nintendo.
That's
And
awesome.
like the grand prize was somebody just got a bucket of chicken from Popeyes, and it was like, if you win, here you go.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and also pride. You get to say, I'm the best at this game.
It's terrible game, yeah.
Well, the Nintendo 64 version of Mortal Kombat, I remember the reason I didn't like it is because and this is just from my perspective, maybe not a historical Mortal Kombat perspective, is that what I liked about Mortal Kombat is it felt real. It looked like a real man fighting a real lady with some real gratuitous like blood or violence. Whereas when I played Street Fighter, which I loved, it looked like a comic book drawing fighting another comic book drawing.
It was more anime. Yeah.
Which both are great, but I leaned towards Mortal Kombat because I was like, oh, the graphics on this are so cool. I was all about using the word graphics.
Yeah, with a K.
And so, but then when I got to the Mortal Kombat on the 64 version, it looked like anime. It looked like the cartoony, because they were still new at 3D. And so it's just like, this is, even the blood was like circles instead of like, I don't know, it's just weird.
And it didn't help that the N64 controller itself was not designed for human hands. Like,
Right.
I think if you were a Ninja Turtle and your hand was like this, maybe it would work better, but that thing was, trying to get that thing to work.
Well, and also talking about blisters, man. To go from like the SNES controller up to like a 64, you're just like, what is happening? I remember the PlayStation 1, I was like so comfy. I was like, oh, this is
Oh, yeah. Which is why that controller has basically not changed since the PS1. Like, they add features here and there, but they found what works. Like, the original Xbox controller, the Duke, remember that thing? It was this big hunking piece of plastic.
I never saw that, no.
Oh, dude, it was terrible. It was like, it was so big, you couldn't get your hands around it, and it had this big, goofy green jewel in the center, and it's like, yeah, they abandoned that pretty quickly.
I bet the worst, I think we could agree on this, the worst controller in the history of gaming is what comes in the box with the Retron. When you who's using that? If you have a Retron, you're probably using like a PC thing, or you have like a good controller for whatever that console is. The controller that came with that was so insulting to like any gamer in the world. They're like, what is this pile of dog shit?
Yeah, and there's also a lot of companies that make like new versions of old controllers, like Genesis or Saturn controllers with USB ports that you can plug into your computer, so you can play older games with the original controller. So
That's perfect.
Yeah, there's no reason to use those things. Or like the Ouya, that controller was, oh my god.
I actually remember liking the 64 controller until you played with it. Like when I was holding, I was like, "Oh, this makes total sense. This for that, and this for that." And it's like, "Nah, this is bad."
Yeah, it's like if you've only had bologna in your life and you've never had a steak before, you don't know how that it gets better.
Exactly, that's a good analogy. Wait, so here's the thing: we like so much of the same stuff. Did you see the new anime Scorpion's Revenge?
Yeah, we talked about it.
Yeah, I mean, but did you like it? You liked it?
Oh yeah, I wrote a review for it on the site that I write for, and no, I loved it because I thought they did a great job. The animation looked great, first of all, because it had that same kind of style that like the recent DC animated movies have had, like Batman, Superman, all those. So the animation looked great. It was gory. The voice acting was fantastic, and I liked how it was basically the story of MK1 that they've done a million times, Shang Tsung's Island, all that stuff, but they changed just enough of it so that it was a little different, and they set up for a sequel, which I really hope they make.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. The only thing I was confused about was the addition of like monsters I'd never seen before. Like I'd be like, wait, who's that guy next to Motaro? I don't know that guy. Like,
yeah, they threw in a bunch of like background characters just kind of flesh it out. But I did like how there were things like they stuck Natara in there in that scene with Johnny when he's at the buffet, and I was like, oh, that's a cute little reference for people who get it. Yeah.
So I really liked that. I don't know why I was going to the. Oh, well, I was saying we like all the same things, right? And so you saw that, you like that. We like the fighting games. We like Mortal Kombat. Do you like professional wrestling?
Hang on. Oh, yeah, brother.
That's incredible. See? Well, then we agree. Then we pretty much have all the same favorite things in common. I didn't think you'd do that. But I got these.
Oh, nice.
Ready to go since you did that.
So now we have to both at the same time. I can't see out of these. You're bringing me to the boiling point.
Ooh. All right. So, that being said, my favorite game, arguably of all time, even more so than Mortal Kombat or more so than NBA Jam, WCW versus NWO on the Nintendo 64.
Oh yeah, all of those like wrestling games from that era, like Nitro and Royal Rumble, I think was another one of them. All those games were super good. But do you kind of like like the history of those games and like why they're so good?
No, so I know they're made by THQ. That's all I know because that would come up early, and we knew if we saw the THQ, because this is internet was pretty prehistoric at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays you can find anything on the internet, but back then you'd look it up and it'd be like, these weird kind of computery things, and it wouldn't give you much information unless you knew how to find it. And I remember thinking, like, as long as THQ made it, it's a game we can rely on. And they made about 4. It was like WCW versus NWO. There was like a WrestleMania one. There was like something 2000. But those were all great. And then wrestling games went back to being trash.
Yeah, well, the big reason for that is the reason those games were so good is because the engine, like how they actually played with like the grappling and everything, that was called the Aki engine. And that was used in a series of games that came from Japan called Fire Pro Wrestling, which was like the original wrestling series on the Super Nintendo. So those THQ games used that engine and made some tweaks and improved it, and they were all good. And then they went to like the current games, which,
They're so bad.
Yeah, they are. But Fire Pro came back a couple years ago, and there's a game called Fire Pro Wrestling World, and it uses all the, from that time, NJPW stars. So you've got like Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi and all those guys. So that game is, and I said this when I reviewed it, I think is the best wrestling game ever made. There's a career mode. There's a manager mode. The level of customization in that game is insane. You can customize the turnbuckles and the ropes in your arenas. And like, you can look online. People have made all these crazy matches with like Mario and Luigi versus Sonic and Shadow. And because it's so customizable, you can do all of that stuff. So if you like those older games and you miss them, Fire Pro Wrestling World, you'll definitely love it.
What's the system? What's the system that for?
Everything. I don't think it's on the. I don't think it's on the Switch, but yeah, PC.
But you can get it on Xbox.
Xbox One, PS4, PC for sure. Yeah.
Nice. I'm definitely gonna do that because I remember like I'm very annoyed when when these games don't get made over and over. Like you said, like there's a tournament for even like the guys that play like the Jackie Chan game, right?
Yeah.
So if it's got a market or some sort of niche, or people are gonna buy it, why not make another? Like NBA Jam should be coming out every single year. Like if they make a or what is it called, like NBA 2K every single year, just make NBA Jam, and then just modify the trades, add some little dinks, and then put out basically the same game with just the traded players and stuff. It would be so easy. I don't know.
Yeah. More often than not, that's usually the license holder and the publisher that usually makes those kinds of decisions. And like, it sucks when stuff like that happens. Like, I love NBA Jam. One of my friends is actually a competitive NBA Jam player. And he places really highly in tournaments that pop up all over the place. But because I'll be honest, I'm not a sports guy. I was never into, football, basketball, stuff like that. But all of the games that were super like arcadey, like NFL Blitz, NBA Jam, NHL Rock the Rink, I loved those games because they weren't like super realistic and like simulation. They were like with NFL Blitz, like after the play, you can just like pile drive a dude on the sideline.
So great.
Those were great.
I often say, or I used to often say about how like video games used to be the place where like gamers got to be not only anything we wanted, but we also got to beat the odds. I could play the toughest jock in my school at football and whip his ass on a gaming console. Whereas now, if you don't know how to read like an NFL playbook or run like a defense, the jocks are going to win again. An actual jock will beat you at football in a game. You're like, this is my arena.
Yeah, this isn't how this is supposed to work.
It's not fair. You get to beat me on the field and on a game. And so I agree with you. Like, I love like NHL Hits, NFL Blitz, like all those kind of NBA Jam, all those
NBA
games
Street.
like that. Yeah, so fun. But they just don't make them. And it's just confusing. I can't imagine there's people out there who are genuinely enjoying like NBA 2K19 or the new like wrestling game, which is the same makers, right? It's the same people that develop that.
Well, yeah, and like about the disaster that happened with last year's WWE game, right?
No, I don't know about this. What is it? What happened?
WWE 2K20 was such an unmitigated disaster. The game was broken and unfinished, and you can look up clips on YouTube of like all the glitches and bugs. It was so bad, they're not making a game next year.
Yeah, well, that's good because they're so bad. I even went online and tried to find like people playing it, like to see like I want to see like how they're playing that they're enjoying this. Yeah, and it's usually just like some foul-mouthed gamer guy, with a gaming channel who's just like obliterating some other guy. The other guys
Mhm.
might as well not even be there. He's like, yeah, I'm just beating you, you sucking, ducking, cum dumpster, like he's like, and I was just like, I don't even
Yeah.
enjoy people that are good at this game, It's
And
like
and
so
his gamer tag is like lowercase x, uppercase X, 420, blaze it,
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was very, very annoying because I love wrestling so much and I love gaming so much. And when I was young, there was nothing better than like a bunch of frozen pizzas and being, the NWO versus
Taking me
it was just
back,
like
man.
it was so fun. And me and my friends love to like revisit that stuff. We still play like Griffey baseball and like have game nights and stuff like that.
There is a lot of crossover between fighting game fans and wrestling fans, so much so that that tournament CEO that I mentioned, the whole thing has been wrestling themed since the beginning, like over 10 years ago. And like for the main games, the top 8 players actually get to have intros, and there's a ring where they take place in the finals. And there's been a couple of really good ones. There was one where this one player named K-Brad, this was for Marvel vs. Capcom 3 a few years ago. He came out on stage, got on the turnbuckle, and did the Stone Cold with the beers, but with Monster Energy drinks, and did this and slammed them on top of the
I
thing.
love it.
And
which is dangerous in a place where there's a bunch of electronics,
Yeah, but and Stone Cold saw it like a week or so afterward, and like because he has a podcast and actually shouted out K-Brad on it. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Oh, that's amazing.
But
I love that.
the last 2 years at CEO, last year they had an AEW show, like an actual show at the Daytona Convention Center that has like an arena attached to it, and the year before that was NJPW.
Oh wow. Yeah, I always say like I'm slowly learning anything that's fun and entertaining and cool, and you could argue artistic. There is an overlap with wrestling fans.
For sure, yeah.
So like in stand-up comedy, like 85% of stand-up comics don't just watch wrestling; they love wrestling. And then the other group would be like, oh yeah, they'd reference like Macho Man or Hulk Hogan or something, and they don't currently watch, like they don't know like the new guys, but they still are like, yeah, wrestling, that's cool. Like it's such a fun, and I'm not shocked at all that the gaming community loves wrestling as well.
Oh yeah, and the thing about wrestling too is, if we're being honest here, wrestling is just real life anime. Like,
really?
Let's be honest here. It's like an episode of Dragon Ball Z, an episode of SmackDown, same thing,
Yeah.
just as over the top. Just
storylines. Yeah, you just said they're going to deal with their conflict with some crazy, weird, violent thing. I love it.
Yeah. There's an undead warrior guy with some dude with a little urn he's carrying around. I'm like, come on, that's goofy as shit. That's why we love it,
though. It's fantastic. I got kind of mad recently. There was a comic friend, or a comic guy that's very successful named Tom Segura.
I saw your tweet.
Yeah, but his argument was just so bad. He was saying like, it's not real. It's like, that's such a generic cliche to say to a wrestling fan. It's like,
Batman isn't real either. Does that stop you from liking Batman? Like, no
Batman's
shit.
Batman's awesome. Yeah, and also like, it's just, I think you're dumb for thinking I'm dumb enough to think it's real. Like, I even as like, Friends isn't real. It's just such a stupid argument.
And then, but there's also the element of wrestling where like the people who actually compete in that sport, like they do get hurt, they do take those bumps. So it is real in that sense. You know what I mean? Like when a guy goes on a set of the movie, especially nowadays for the most part, he's not jumping in front of the car or jumping out of the window. But with wrestling, those guys are. Like
they have to. They don't have time to say, bring in my stunt double.
Exactly. Like last year, Cody Rhodes got hit with the chair at CEO. And he was bleeding, and he had to get 13 stitches the next day. It's like, yeah, you can see the blood on the mat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and also, like, did you see the Royal Rumble this year? Did you watch Royal Rumble?
I didn't know, but I heard about it.
So I think it was Royal Rumble. Beth Phoenix took a chair shot or something so gruesome that her whole scalp was open and she's bleeding everywhere. Oof. And so, when those things happen, you figure out a way to get them out of there. You do a quick roll up if she's supposed to win, or you do a quick elimination if she's supposed to lose. But because it's a Royal Rumble, she's supposed to stay in the match for so long because there's a determined time that she was supposed to leave. So she just had to stay in there, bleeding all over the joint, like just making a gross scene because she had a finish with Edge that she was supposed to do with it. And it was like a whole thing. So.
Yeah, and then you have some guy on the internet going, that's not real.
I know, yeah. Yeah, and we're like, that's fine. But the blood is Yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting. So, if there's a game that you could recommend to my audience, that ever, you don't have to be like a gamer, you don't have to like really know, something like entry level that people can go, you know what, that seemed fun. They inspired me to kind of go back to my youth and play a game. What would you recommend?
Well, it's been really fortunate that during this whole unfortunate incident of the quarantine, of the pandemic and everything, there has been a lot of really good games that have come out like one after the other in the past
really?
couple of months. So one of the Final Fantasy VII Remake is a great example. That's a
Okay.
really good game. If you've played the original or if you haven't, it's still really enjoyable. The Resident Evil 3 Remake came out, was really good, and I'm a big Resident Evil fan, as you can tell.
Nice.
That
Those
was
games are
good.
fun.
And then I was telling you the other day, Streets of Rage 4, which
Yeah.
is a sequel to those old games from the Sega Genesis. And it's been 29 years since Streets of Rage 3. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's is all the gap is literally how long I've been alive. So that game came out, and the team that made it was able to perfectly take like the old school sensibilities and modernize it and give it a really cool art style, a really cool soundtrack. And the game's like $25, and you can replay it over and over again because it's like an old arcade game. Beating it isn't the end. You just
Right.
go back in and do it again with a different character on a higher difficulty setting. So
Which is good about all fighting games that way.
yeah. So for that is currently my game of the year right now, which might sound like blasphemy to people who like Final Fantasy VII and all that, which was really good, but I would definitely recommend Streets of Rage 4 to anyone looking for a fun arcade style game.
How many, and this is the 8-year-old Jeff in me, I always think a fighting game is better if you give me more characters to play with. I love options. I like when it's, a lot of guys. I was very disappointed with Mortal Kombat 11, which was a phenomenal game, but when I initially turned it on and I saw how many people were choosable, I was like, no robots? We have no, like, it was just like the thing that they didn't.
RoboCop coming soon, yeah.
Dude, that's going to be huge.
Well, see, the thing about that is sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's not. Like, usually games with really big rosters are really unbalanced. Like, my favorite game here, Marvel 2, has a 52 character roster. You will see like 8 or 10 of those characters in an actual tournament because it's so unbalanced, but that's kind of part of the fun too. Like,
Yeah.
I think balanced fighting games aren't fun. Anyone who tells you that is lying to themselves. But so it depends on the game because, like, yeah, MK11 did have a smaller roster, but each character was so different and so unique that it felt good, and there was all these different kinds of characters you could play from, as opposed to like Mortal Kombat Armageddon on PS2, which had literally every character in the franchise up until that point, and it sucked because they all played exactly the same.
That's the worst.
Yeah. So it honestly depends on the game. Sometimes a smaller roster is good, and you nowadays with DLC and everything, most games that at least do a little bit well will get support down the line.
Yeah. I was like annoyed too with Mortal Kombat X that there's like, I don't know, like 7 people on that thing that aren't even in the Mortal Kombat universe. It's like Jason Voorhees and Alien and Predator, and I love all of those.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with those. But there's a weird part of me inside that goes, why is Joker here? The Joker's not supposed to be getting killed by Scorpion. Like it just felt weird.
Yeah, guest characters are kind of a weird thing because like all the fighting games do it, like a lot of them anyway, but the character has to feel like they match in that universe. Like all those horror movie characters are perfect for Mortal Kombat. They make total sense, right? But then when you put someone like Negan from Walking Dead in Tekken, it's like,
right?
Huh? Why? What? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So it depends on the game, honestly. But yeah, Joker and MK is weird, but weirdly enough, he kind of fits in perfectly.
I think Joker might have been a bad example, but I feel like when I see a Spawn, a Joker, a Terminator, or any of those things, it feels, and maybe this is the wrestling fan in me, because I've loved wrestling since before I can remember, is that when you see like Mr. T or Cyndi Lauper or David
or
Arquette,
RoboCop,
you'd go, what? No, that's from that thing that I love. It's not from this thing that I love. So I feel like it's like when you see Chris or Dolph Ziggler do stand-up comedy. You're like, what? Why is Mankind at the Funny Bone on Friday? Like he's not supposed to be here.
Stay in your lane, man.
Yeah, and so it kind of feels like that on the video games at times. But usually they do it so well that I end up really enjoying it.
Yeah, like there's a reason Marvel vs. Capcom is my favorite thing, because it's like it's two things that I love so much that you would never think to put together unless somebody did it.
Right. Well, and I read online on some of those threads that like Mortal Kombat versus Street Fighter is the game everyone wants but wouldn't really want.
It's the game everyone wants that they would hate, because
that's the best. Yeah, that's the line. Like, because it's true. Maybe you wrote that article.
I didn't, but no, it's been a conversation for a long time, and it's never going to happen just from a realistic perspective, because Capcom is not going to let anyone tear Ryu's head off. First of all,
right?
There's that.
Yeah.
If we were somehow able to get over that hurdle, and then if they don't do that, then you have a situation like MK versus DC, where the game is completely neutered and nobody's happy, right?
Right.
But even then, the two games play so differently that they wouldn't mesh together very well. Like Mortal Kombat is very grounded with a lot of heavy normal moves. And in Street Fighter, especially depending on which one we're talking about, there's a lot of air combat and air activities and everything. And it's like one of the biggest differences, Mortal Kombat has a block button and Street Fighter doesn't. So yeah. It's
like a standard move, just for anyone that's watching or listening who doesn't, even play these games. A standard move in Mortal Kombat would be back, forward, Y, or down, forward, A, or even occasionally like a back, forward, down, B, or something like that. You'd be the series of buttons on the D-pad and then one button here. Now, with Street Fighter, what would like a standard move be on Street Fighter?
Well, you have the most standard is the Hadoken, the fireball, which is quarter circle forward and punch, which is you roll the control stick from down forward to forward and press the punch button.
Okay, so that's similar. I mean, that's the same thing as like a Sub-Zero's.
Which is kind of where Mortal Kombat got that with like the down forward.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of Street Fighter players like myself, when I play Mortal Kombat, I will just do the Street Fighter notation because you get the same thing in the end. Yeah. But then if we're talking like super moves, then we've got double quarter circle forward and triple punch. And then you start getting into these things where like, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like Mortal Kombat doesn't have any triple, you don't have to hit 3 buttons at once, hardly ever. Occasionally like the right trigger and a button, but never like 3 at a time or 2 at a time.
Or God forbid you have an SNK game where they have the pretzel motion where you have to loop your control stick around, and those things are a nightmare.
That sounds just intimidating to learn.
It is, yeah, and that's a reason why a lot of people get turned off from fighting games, because they are very intimidated by it. But it's one of those things where like not everyone who plays fighting games is trying to be like, I'm going to be the Evo champion. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's like so far and few between of people who actually compete at that level. 90% of people who play fighting games play for fun. And then if you're someone like me who has that kind of like, I like to say like I'm above average in basically every fighting game that I play, because I have that core knowledge that kind of just carries over from game to game. But it's mostly just for fun. And people don't like losing. I don't know if you know this, but
yeah.
And the reason I think a lot of games like your Fortnites and your League of Legends are so popular, even though I can't stand those games.
Yeah, I see those games.
They're team-based games, so you can blame your teammates, you can blame the game, and all that kind of stuff. In fighting games, there's just you, and most people don't have that level of self-accountability to go, I fucked up.
Right. Well, I will say that's the interesting thing about the way I kind of view life and video games in the same way, is that like I'm okay when I have a conversation with someone. I'm so willing to be wrong. I'm like, okay, yeah, teach me, or like, yeah, I have no link to needing to be correct or to need. It doesn't bother me. Like, let's just have a nice conversation. Let's just whatever, like if someone, like you've ever been with someone and they're like a good story, you're like, dude, I didn't know my stories had to be flawless home runs of stories just to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
to
yeah.
someone.
Or
I
the-
would
or-
never do that to someone.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, and I have no attachment. So in the same way with games, like, I don't need to be good. I just want to really have fun, and I want to have a good time. And I think that's what makes me intimidated by, like, real professional tournaments and stuff, is because I feel like I would go there and then be like, oh, they must look at me like I'm a stupid loser because I don't even know, like, I'd be nervous to ask, like, hey, who's this character? They'd be like, what? You're
Yeah.
here and you don't know that character? You're like, no, I came to learn, ding dong. You know?
Well, that's another thing. People have this perception of the fighting game community that they are like that. And in my experience, and I think most people in the community will say this, we're very open and we're very willing to help people. Like, as long as you're willing to learn and you're not a dick, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's the biggest thing. Like, just don't be a dick. And 9 times out of 10, people will be willing to, because it's like when you teach somebody or show them something from your favorite game, you're sharing that love with somebody
Yeah.
else. And that's what all of nerddom basically is. That's why conventions exist, to share your love of these things with other people. And like, perfect example, when you said, oh, if you went to one of these tournaments, you know what I do when I go to most of these tournaments? I meet up with my friends, I enter, I go 0-2, get shit-faced, and enjoy the rest of the tournament.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, that sounds right up my alley. I have felt that at Comic-Cons and things like that too, with it. It is what I enjoy about it is that people appreciate that you're taking an interest in what they appreciate. And so then that makes them a lot more receptive. It's just that initial thing of like, why is he here? Is he going to make fun of this? He's that comedian who's hosting a thing on Spike TV. He probably thinks we're all, I'm like, no, I'm one of you. Like I want to be in this, you know, like it's, but I appreciate that. And you know, a case in point, just to wrap this up, like, you know, I knew I felt like I could reach out to you and I'd be like, I think I really, while I was watching it, I think I could be friends with that guy. The guy seems like a cool ass, nice guy. I want to learn. I'm learning from him on this. I'd like to meet him and be his friend.
Well, thank you. I hope I didn't disappoint you.
Not at all. You're the best, man. I'm gonna be in Florida real soon doing stand up. So
oh, really?
we'll have to kick it, man. Let's get a beer.
Yeah, definitely, man. Hit me up.
Yeah. So where can my audience follow you or see what you're doing or read the things that you're writing?
Well, there's a couple of things. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all level 3 X Factor with the number 3.
Okay.
I am the games editor on a website called outrightgeekery.com, outright GEEKERY.com. And then I also write for a website called PC Invasion, which is a PC gaming site. And then if you want to hear more of me talking shit, I have a podcast with a couple of friends that I host called Throwing the Controller. We did it for years. We stopped for a little bit because schedules got all kind of changed and everything. And we actually just recorded our comeback episode a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to record again on Saturday. So you can check that out if you want to hear more stuff like that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And what do you guys talk about on the podcast mostly?
We usually have a subject for the episode, but sometimes we just shoot the shit, and you know how it goes. Like, you start talking about one thing, and before you know it, you're off on some weird tangent. It's like, what were we talking about again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I appreciate you being on here, man. We're gonna put all your stuff down in the bottom so they can know where to follow you and read about you. And let's stay in touch, man. Let's play some games.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll talk about maybe doing something with that history of Mortal Kombat.
We can start setting that up literally like today because I think that's a cool thing. And then also, like, people like me are looking for that shit, you know? Like, I literally spent this entire quarantine being like, all right, I'm going to dedicate this time to, like, learning what, you know, because I originally thought Mortal Kombat was probably just a game guy, made some cool-looking guys, characters, and then you make them fight. I didn't know that he had a story for the entire thing.
Yeah,
and it's
the lore.
It's so much more complicated than Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. I mean, it's a really because, you know, like in Harry Potter, if they have a character, they're not going to kill it off just because a bunch of, you know, gamers were like, this character sucks. But Mortal Kombat has to deal with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then they'll kill him and bring him back, and then kill him again, and then bring him back, then reset the timeline and bring everyone back, and
and you know that they're doing that because it's a video game for sure. It's
oh yeah.
And then killing a Mortal Kombat character and then having him just be an undead version is such a heel turn. It's like, that's all it is. Like, oh, now Liu Kang's bad. It's just like a total wrestling heel turn.
Absolutely. And like, And yeah, besides, death in the Mortal Kombat universe means absolutely nothing. The afterlife in Mortal Kombat has a slip and slide installed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Mortal Kombat 1, Sub-Zero died 1 billion times just in my living room. That's all. I mean, just in my house. So.
Yeah. And then in the storyline, he died, and then he became Noob Saibot. So,
right.
you know.
And then you get a new one with no mask. It's kind of fun.
And a scar on his face.
Well, you're the best, dude. I appreciate you doing this. And, yeah, love you, man. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And we're out. Perfect, man.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm heading to my buddy's house now, and then I'm going to have my editor probably chop this up tomorrow, and then we'll put it up.
Dude, I'm so excited, man. And
cool.
yeah, let me know when you're in Florida. Absolutely. And also, yeah, we'll talk about the history of MK thing. I really like that idea because, like I said, the scripts for 3 and 4 have been sitting on my Google Docs forever unused.
Yeah, I think that it'd be a super easy thing to shoot because, like, it was just you in front of a green screen, right?
That's all it was, yeah.
Yeah, and then
and I have all that equipment here.
Yeah, and the hardest thing that you did, or the hardest part of it, you've already done the work. Like, you've already written it up. That's the hard part. Is the
exactly, yeah.
Making sure it's accurate. So yeah, we'll talk more about that, dude.
All right, man. Thanks again.
Right.
Have a good rest of the day. All right,
you're
peace.
The best. See you, bud.
How about that? Kevin CARIGNAN, what a great guy. Hey, if you guys want to watch these episodes, if you guys want free comedy club tickets to all of my shows for life, please subscribe to patreon.com/JeffDye. Go there. You can get all those goodies for $10 a month, and you're also helping keep my home. You're helping pay my mortgage because I am not a big fancy podcaster like Joe Rogan and Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura, guys that I respect and love. But they've got sponsors and things. I've done 112 weeks and I don't have any sponsors. So I appreciate you guys. You guys are actually making this thing a possibility, and I really love it. And if you aren't one, consider it. And if you are just listening for free, that's cool too. We're happy to have you. I love all the people, and you're one of the people, so I love you. Hey, see you guys next week.
Friendship